Thanks everybody for attending session 2. We just completed the first one from 12 to 2, and we have another one tonight. My name is Dan Coretta. We haven't met. I'm current board president. We're here to talk about the capital project review and potential funding scenarios. In particular, we're discussing options to fund the club's recapitalization needs over the next 5 years. If you think about sort of our journey over the past 10 years as we've needed to spend capital on various projects, we've really, I think it's characterized by 3 things. One is we've done bank financing. We obviously have the mortgage loan. We added a loan for the irrigation. Total, we have about $2 million in debt. So we've used that to fund a big irrigation project a few years ago. Secondly, over the past 10 years, we've raised capital by selling lifetime memberships. We've sold 29 of those, which raised, rounding, $2.5 million that was used for various capital needs. And quite frankly, third, we've kicked the can down the road. And what I mean by that is we've continue to defer projects that really need to be done. So if I'm not asking you to raise your hands, but it would be, who here thinks that the cart paths, are kind of beyond when they should have been repaired, or our tennis, sort of a lot of things at the bracket facility, or our bunkers. Ideally, we would have had money to have those professionally done a few years ago. So we've reached the point where we feel we need to identify and address funding for these critical needs that really can't continue to sort of kick the can. Where we are quickly, you see today's town hall presenting 2 funding alternatives. As you know, we got the Golf Master Plan from Jeff Lawrence last year. Many of you attended focus groups that we had to expand that to include what Jeff's work was highest priority, but what also was important for the racket facility, what also was important for the clubhouse. Identified those key projects, went into detailed design work. It really took about 4 or 5 months. We're here today to present the results of that work, the costs for the projects, and 2 distinct paths around funding. To be clear, we as a board are still in the member gathering feedback phase. You're not going to see a proposal today with a vote coming on today. We think there are 2 distinct paths. We want to explain those, and we want to get input over the next month, leading to a board vote on a proposal to give to membership. We obviously want to propose something that we think has the highest chance of passage. And I have TBD for that. Don't know if that'll be in 30 days or 60 days. All depends on sort of the next few weeks as we hear from members. Keith and I had the opportunity to speak to you all, but what you're seeing is the cumulative work of the entire board over this year. I just want to, so you know who's here from the board. Obviously, Keith Galbraith will be speaking. Jen Dellinger right there, Scooney here, John Bohan, Frank Zadora, and others are attending the other session. So we have, six board members here right now, and appreciate all of the work they've done to get us to this point. We are going to run through the project costs after we quickly recap the projects. The current cash position, Keith has projected our cash flow over the next 5 years and how much will be generated for capital that can be used toward those projects, and then talk about the gap remaining and 2 approaches that we can take to fund those. The capital projects, quickly, why is investment needed? Jeff put together the master plan. Let's face it, the second bullet here, the longevity and success of our club is very much dependent upon having a strong golf product, a strong golf course. That is critical to our long-term success. The investments we need to improve playability, aesthetics, and maintenance. Many of our components, I didn't understand that, certain components on the course have a useful life expectancy, be it bunkers, certain time frame, tee boxes, etc. We have many beyond the useful life. And greens, we've basically been told by Jeff, who sent, involved labs and experts, that our greens will need to be rebuilt at sometime in the relatively near future, anywhere from the next few years to 7 years. And so it's really a matter of if not when, and we'll talk about our plans around that. On the racket side, for those of you that are racket users, don't need to tell you, it's a very old infrastructure that we've underinvested in, areas in disrepair. If you just look at the landscaping, and we've actually had a couple meetings with the residents around the facility, concerned with sort of the view and the lack of sort of looking like the rest of our club, which it doesn't. Pickleball, as you know, has just exploded, actually attracting members. We have sort of stopgap pickleball courts that need addressed. And finally, it's getting to the point of some safety concerns around fences ready to fall down, concrete chipping, etc. And finally, house, again, you'll see the theme of aging infrastructure now that we're over 50 years old. Parking lots, we need more space, and we need, obviously, desperate need of sort of repaving. Overall focus on the house is really enhancing member satisfaction. In particular, if you look at this room, we have 750 members, which equates to rounding 750 memberships, which equates to 1,400 members. We have a space here that for certain events that we hold can comfortably hold 80 or 90. That is causes members not able to sign up for things they'd like to sign up for because it fills up quickly, or sort of a crowding scenario. And so we're looking to elevate the member guest experience. So that's a quick snapshot of why investment is needed. I'm going to turn it over for a while to Keith, who will run through the project costs, and then I'll be back up.
Great. Thank you, Dan. I'm going to try and do this without the microphone. Hopefully everyone can hear me back there. Great. First, just want to state that Dan is celebrating his 70th birthday by presenting I also want to express my gratitude for being allowed to serve membership. Love the challenge, love being able to do what I think we do as a board together to service you, and that's important, right? That we are not here to make a decision. We are here to communicate with membership, get feedback, and then put forward a proposal we think will be supported, right? Without your support, what we do is for naught. So that it's critical to ensure that you understand how we feel about this and how we feel we're positioned. With that said, I get to talk about the numbers. I love numbers.
Yes, he does.
Okay, so golf, there's 3 areas we're going to talk about: the golf course, rackets, and house, just as Dan has referenced the projects. Bunkers, $1 million. Drainage, $575. And for those that were at the Jeff Lawrence presentation, when he went through the master plan, there were gaps in some of the costs that were discussed. Gaps in that he didn't have a contingency cost, he did not have a management fee presented, there was no inflation for projects that would take over a year, and there were no expectation of the impact of lost revenue if there needed to be a closure. We've taken that into account. You can debate whether or not it's the right amount. Is 10% contingency enough? Sure, you can have that debate, but we're being transparent and presenting all these components in the numbers we put forward. So taking off where I left off, $1 million for tee boxes. Cart pass, $225,000. We received 2. Well, this one actually 1 quote. But this doesn't entail taking all the golf cart paths up. It anticipates removing 4 and 17 completely, regrading, repaving, and then all the other paths addressing the sections that are broken up, cutting tree roots where necessary, addressing drainage where necessary, and repaving those sections. If we were to do the whole course, redo all the cart paths from scratch, it would be approaching $1 million. And then beautification, that's an estimate we came up. It's an educated guess based on quotes we received for rackets and some of the depictions that Jeff Lawrence proposed in the graphics of how he could beautify the course. But the number of $3.2 million you'll see in the project summary. What this list does not include is addressing the greens. We'll talk about a proposed solution there. Why that's not in this number to start with, we've heard, in our focus groups and ongoing discussions with membership, there's fatigue over the thought of closing down our course. And so we don't see that as a viable solution that would be supported. So we're looking to come up with a better solution to address that problem. Also in here, what you don't see that was listed in the master plan by Jeff Lawrence is addressing the surrounds, investing in the areas around the greens. That's not being brought forward as we don't see that as something that's affordable in what we're trying to balance in the total cost. And you'll see that total cost in a moment. Okay, rackets. Beautification, $97,000. This is what Dan referred to as if you've seen the courts and their surrounds, they need attention. This contemplates doing plantings, quite a few plantings, but also addressing drainage and irrigation. Concrete, if everyone will get a copy of this presentation. In the appendix, there are depictions of what the concrete looks like over by rackets. It needs to be addressed. Replace fence. We've had quotes come in. We've gotten 2 quotes. The question was asked, can we do anything other than a full replacement? We've been told no. Things have shifted in the concrete. The poles are bent. It's not a matter of painting the posts and redoing some of the chain link. That's not a viable option. So to address the fence, it's $130,000. The pickleball court rebuild. There was a plan to redo the pickleball courts. There was a vote supporting that when the course went and pivoted to address it. The quotes came in well above expectations at around $700,000. At that time, it was concluded we really couldn't do it. Right? We didn't have the money. The $700,000 just didn't seem to make sense at the time. Okay, when we went through the focus groups, there was that price tag in everyone's mind, and because of that, we just dismissed it. And we heard from people during those focus group discussions that, hey, we might have been discouraged. Has anyone thought about revisiting those costs? And in fact, we did. And it came in at $450, and we've increased it to have a contingency. So that's what that is for total pickleball rebuild. Okay. And automated sprinklers for the clay courts. Now, again, take this in context of what we're doing. We're not proposing this at this point. This is for illustrative purpose to review what some of these projects could be. But it's $1 million for Rackets to address everything that came out of those focus groups is what was needed. Okay, house. This one was a little bit more challenging to get the quotes, to just engage people, to get them out, to give us commitments, but we did engage with Penix. They did the church as you enter the community, have a good reputation. Anyway, we engaged them and got some quotes. The first one actually for all 4 parking lots, that was 2 quotes, not Penix, but paving companies. This is the average of the 2, and it's to do the parking lots, the concrete stops, and the line paint. This one you don't need pictures. If you come through the facility, you see the shape of our parking lots. It needs to be addressed. Okay, kitchen redesign. And we should really label this kitchen redesign phase 2. A few years ago, we went through, did the investment in the bar area, changed where the banquet area was. We did what we could with the funds available at that time to address our kitchen challenges. It was done in a mindful way to ensure that whatever investment was made wasn't wasted. Those assets would be reused. But it did not address the fundamental problems. And it's not just, people will talk about capacity in the context of having non-member events. It's not even that. It's servicing our current membership, right? The chef did an exceptional white paper when we challenged on why do we have service levels at certain times when there's maybe a banquet event and a la carte dining and there's more people dining than expected. He came forward with a very mindful white paper explaining how the kitchen is designed in reverse of what the flow should be. So this would be addressing that. This would be, you'll see some of the depictions of what this structurally could look like, but this is addressing the construction, how we'd have to adjust that space, as well as additional investment in equipment, shelving, and some of the other features that would require the kitchen to be all it could be. Banquet expansion. You'll see various depictions of what could be. This is the least expensive, least exciting. All this is proposing is to remove this butler area / bar to give us a flow into the Riverview room to increase capacity. Okay, we've chosen this again. I think none of what's been put forward I would consider frivolous, right? We're trying to be very mindful in how we potentially spend money. This would get us part way there. If you look at the depictions, there are other estimates we received approaching $1 million to open up these walls, to have glass folding doors, to have covered decking area with infrared heaters, and we're not even bringing that forward. But that is one of the possibilities, and you'll see it in the depictions. And then all-weather dining. There were 3 quotes received from all-weather dining. This 620 represents the least expensive of the 3 options, and basically gives us a covered area right near the driving range area where our current outdoor dining is, but to make it all weather. Okay, so if you sum up all these costs, you're looking at $5.7 million. This $5.7 million has those less expensive options for outside dining, banquet expansion, also no greens, no surrounds, and we're at $5.7 million. Cash position. So we are we're in a better position than we've been in a long time. But it doesn't mean that we can afford $5.7 million, right? And I'll walk you through that. So, 2012, $20,000. And this, by the way, this represents end-of-year balances. So as of 12/31, for each period presented, less, we started several years ago to raise prepaid dining and prepaid monthly dues. That was done as a mechanism to give us cash to start the year, okay? I backed that out of these numbers to give you true cash position, if you will. So we're going from 20,000. We're forecasting at the end of this year to have approximately $700,000. Okay, much better position than we've been in. But you'll see how that cash and projected cash flow will be utilized over the next 5 years. Okay, what this represents is an estimate of our projected 5 years of cash flow. Okay, 497, that takes that 697 I just showed, and takes 200,000 and says that should be allocated to operations. People can debate, well, maybe it should be 400,000, but for this illustration, I've assumed 200,000 put aside for operations. Okay, transferred cash generated from operations to capital. Our bylaws allow us to transfer $204,000 a year from operations to cash to be allocated for capital projects. Okay, that's what this represents over 5 years. Transfer of initiation fees. What that is just what it states, right? But it's 90% of the initiation fees we bring in if we do not have a waiting list for equity membership reimbursement. The bylaws allow us to transfer 90% of our initiation fees into our capital fund account. So I've estimated this based on what our new membership experience has been over the last 2 years. Roughly 36 new members churning, okay? That's what this assumption is. I can change if we do better than that. We can have more than the 2 million. If we do worse, obviously less. Okay? So net cash from operations, if I take these two amounts, $3.1 million. If I then add that to the 497, we have $3.6 million to fund capital. What's here though? Okay, repair and replace capital, near and dear to Craig Miller, thank you. Craig's done an exceptional job several years ago going through. We didn't have really reserves, we didn't really have a great plan, and we went, the club, if you go back to the cash flow projections, didn't really have the luxury and flexibility to plan for what needs to be done for a facility that's 50 years old, okay? Craig went through, inventoried every asset we have, and whether it's HVAC, our roofing, pool, pool pumps, the pool finish, equipment on the facility. He went through and inventoried every single asset with a projection of when it should be replaced, okay? That right now is roughly $750,000. I've trimmed that down for this purpose. I said, all right, let's say $600,000 based on what our spending capacity and capability has been over the last couple of years. So I'm assuming that this is going to be roughly $600,000 a year. It's $3 million. After all this, from where we start, over a 5-year period, that gives us $605,000 left available to address capital improvement needs. So, a summary, after that 604, we have to raise $5.1 million if our appetite is to address all those projects we listed, okay? Without touching the greens. Okay. There's 3 options, but really only 2. Only 2 because we eliminate pivoting to acquiring debt as a way to address this need. Okay, we think we would have somewhere $1.5 to $2 million of capability to go out, acquire new debt, because of how the club is in a better shape than it was when we went out to get the irrigation loan. Okay, but the consequences, right? If we were to assume 8%, okay, our dues would have to go up 7% to address that. And 1.5 million is only a fraction of the money needed. And if we go that path, we lose the ability to lean on debt if something occurs unexpected in the future. And it might be, we'll talk about the greens, but having debt availability may help us make a more mindful decision on how to address the greens if they fail in a year, right? If we turn to debt now, we lose that flexibility. Okay, so this is the other 2 funding alternatives. It's either a membership assessment or a third-party recapitalization. So, and there's been some changes. There's some people committees that we've had discussions with over the last couple of weeks, and we really have taken input. Any discussions to adjust our thinking, adjust our presentation. One of the adjustments, we had a lower assessment amount in our discussions, and I'll explain that. And we also had a different greens amount that I'll also explain. But to achieve and raise the funds, excluding the greens, we have to have an assessment of $12,000 full golf equivalent. Remember, this is for illustrative purpose. We're not proposing this at this point, but it's just to try and understand the magnitude of what it might take, all right, to achieve what we put forward. And I'm assuming when I do these calculations that we'll have a 10% membership attrition, okay, which is accounted for in this 12. But what's not evident when you go through this is that just to stay where we're at, from an operating standpoint, we'd have to increase dues 11% to just stay where we are as far as operating the course, to basically backfill the members that would be lost in this attrition. If we do go this route, we'd envision offering a payment plan. You could pay up front, lump sum, or some type of financing. That financing alternative would bring an administrative fee, we'd envision, and also a cost of interest, okay, that would be considered. Right now we're thinking that based on who utilizes what and what we're trying to fund, it would be broken up 12,000 full golf, 7.2 thousand for sports, and 4.8 for social. And that assessment would raise that 5.2 million. That combined with that 600 and some, or almost $500,000 worth of cash from operations would allow us to address that spend of 5.8 million. Okay. Lower assessment levels. That could be an approach. We'd only be executing a portion of what we're bringing forward, and the board would have to go back, reprioritize what would make the cut based on membership feedback. And we'd also put ourselves in a position where we're kind of kicking the can down the road, where at some point, 3-5 years, there might be another board in place that says, listen, we didn't do everything we wanted to and felt we needed to drive the value and maintain the value of the club. We're going to need another assessment. That's a very real possibility. Okay, creation, I've talked about how we've seen this membership fatigue. There's concern about closing down the course. There is this perception that we've rebuilt the greens, which we didn't. They're push-up greens. We resprigged them. If you ask the professionals, it was a Band-Aid. We didn't address the underlying problem. We've had experts come in and say, you know, you've got different substrate on every green. You know, you really have to address this, or you're playing Russian roulette, they'll die off. We're all experiencing, of course, really nice greens right now, right? Our agronomy staff has done a terrific job. There's this sense that, well, you know, look, they're terrific. What are you trying to propose? So we're trying to be mindful in our approach. You know, as a board, we could, you know, one approach is we can stick our head in the ground and say, well, the experts said it's not a matter as to if, it's when. And we can ignore the problem and hope we never have to deal with it. Or we can start planning to be able to react when they fail. And what we're proposing, potentially, is creation of this Greens Rebuild Fund. And this is where I talked about changes that have occurred as we've had these discussions with committees and other key members. When we first proposed this, we said it was $74 for full member equivalent to get to $2.5 million after 7 years. We went back and, you know, we had some comments, and when we thought about it, we very well, if it's over 7 years, our irrigation loan will be paid off. That $950,000 taken out to do the irrigation. We wanted to be mindful and say, okay, we don't have to raise it all through this fund, this monthly payment that we'll have available to us, $950,000. So we changed the bogey. We changed it to $1.6 million accumulated over 7 years, plus replacement lending, $950,000, to get us to the $2.5 million that we'd be needing. Now, again, we're anticipating of when they might fail, or when they will fail, based on what the experts have told us. If it's 4 years from now, at least we'll have some funds accumulated, we'll have some level of debt. It won't be the 2.5, but we'd be in a better position than doing nothing. Okay, at least that's the thing. So if we raise this capital real quick, that's one part of the problem, one part of the solution is addressed. There's actually execution, right? Being the steward of millions of dollars and making sure projects, and you've got a board that rotates. Most people, have a full-time job, and it takes a lot of capacity. You've also, right now we're in a position where our general manager is just retired. You've got to think about that. What's the skill set we bring in with the general manager? Will they be a good project executioner? Will they be able to pivot and solve problems that will come up during programs like this? Internal control environment. I love talking internal controls as an accountant. That simply put, that's what processes are in place to safeguard assets. Whether it's money in the bank account, whether it's booze in the bar, right? Whether it's chemicals in the agronomy shed. It's what processes you have in place to safeguard those assets. Well, to this point, up until recently, we didn't have a lot of money to pay, right? It was in the door, out the door. If we were to embark on this, we now are the stewards of millions of dollars. We would have to beef up our internal control environment. We don't have an audit. If we have an audit, that's another $100 grand. We don't have necessarily enough staff to segregate duties, make sure that the person writing the checks isn't the same person reconciling the bank accounts, right? I'm not saying it happens here, but you want to build processes that gives you more comfort and lets you sleep at night better, knowing it's safeguard. So that would have to be addressed. Our contingency estimates that I guess, are they right? Our experience with addressing the bathrooms down in the pool, just that project came in 300% over budget. To no one's fault, it's just, if you're a homeowner, you open a wall, you know what happens, right? There's always, you can not always expect the unexpected. So, is that the right amount? And changes in economic cycle, jumping to that last point, it ties to the continuity of the board. you're taking on all this money, you're managing multi-year projects, economic cycles change, board focus changes, the emergency at hand changes, right? What does that do to project management? Not saying these can't be overcome, but they're things that you have to be thoughtful of if you're going to embark on this path. And with that, I'll hand it over to Dan.
Keith's voice is a lot more powerful than mine, so I need the mic. So, quite honestly, when we knew months ago that the numbers were huge, right? Didn't know the exact cost estimates, but we had approximation, could easily translate that to sort of some really big assessment levels. So, quite honestly, we could have stopped there and said, guys, your choice is to write a big check or a medium-sized check and potentially have issues down the road. But we wanted to look at other alternatives to see if there was anything else viable that we felt should be considered by members. That gets us to option 2, which is the recapitalization of the club through a third party. To be clear, it's basically the sale of the club to a third party with the purchase being through the recapitalization. I'll explain that shortly. Increasingly, we saw many companies growing that are owners of clubs. So clearly other clubs facing, I think, the same sort of decision point where we are around bid assessment or not have looked. As we embarked on this a few months ago, we said as a board, what would be, if we were going to partner with a third party like in this environment, what would we be looking for? First, we want somebody that has demonstrated expertise, owns and operates significant number of premier clubs, not somebody that's a provider of 5 clubs, 10 clubs, much bigger. Secondly, successful experience with member-owned clubs like ourselves versus private clubs that they've taken over. Third, as much as possible, how could we maintain the sort of cultural traditions of our club, not have somebody come in and say, we're changing everything, it's not going to feel the same. Demonstrated ability to deliver high-end amenities, GM-centric operating model, obviously important that the general manager that we'd be interfacing with has the power, not somebody that needs to go to headquarters to sort of get decisions made. And need to have a feedback loop for members. There no longer would be a board. There'd be how then do members sort of provide input. And finally, obviously, well-capitalized company. We were contacted back in April by a company that at the time I, quite frankly, never heard of, called Concert Golf Partners. I decided to have a conversation with them. They checked a fair amount of the boxes that we had laid out, brought the board in, and we determined it made sense to begin a due diligence process over the next 4 months or so, while simultaneously we were working on the detailed design of the project to see if this got to the point where we thought it was a viable option for members to consider. We've done that and believe it is a viable option to be considered and want to share what we've learned. We have spent a lot of time at a core group of 5 of their clubs with on-site visits, member interviews, employee interviews, etc. and negotiated critical elements right out of the gate that, quite frankly, if we couldn't get over those or get agreement on those, it was non-starters to continue the conversation. As we began that, I'd asked Keith, could you do some work to determine what is our value? How would you value, with your financial background experience, what kind of valuation would you put on the club? And I'd like him to quickly walk through that.
Thank you, Dan. It's me again. And this is in response to some of the questions we got through the first few times we had these discussions over the last couple of weeks. People have been bringing up, okay, what did you do to value it? Great question. So we would not be looking, any path we take, we want to ensure that this land can be developed. Right? Dan will speak to some of the covenants we're going to have in the contract, as well as trying to understand what protection there is with the HOA and county and state regulations in ensuring that the land will not be developed. If the land cannot be developed in any scenario, it's not like a real estate appraisal. You've got to look to what the purpose of that property is. And when it's a single-use property, you look at the business it supports. The business that this land supports is the golf course. So you look to the cash flow that can generate. And there's going to be a couple different values. There's going to be a value to us, and a value that to someone that could run the business differently and has something else they can bring to the table. This is the value that it means to us, okay? If I take a look at the cash generated, this is roughly our cash generated in the current budget. I add back, people in business, when you value a company, you look to EBITDA, right? Earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization as an indication of cash flow that it can generate. We've tried to do that here. Okay, after going through that, we come up with $1 million. We then apply a 10-year multiple, saying that an investor would expect over 10 years to get the value out that they put in. Okay, $10 million. But also to support this business, there are those capital needs we referred to earlier, just to repair and replace. Not improvements, but just the capital spend to maintain the infrastructure. $600,000 a year, remember that reference? Okay, that's that same $6 million over 10 years. Gives you a value of 4.7. That's a value to us. Before we started any discussions, when Concert came up as a potential person that was interested, and there's a lot of good reasons for them to be interested, we went through a presentation and they tried to tell us why this made sense. Right? Part of it's the development in the area and the number of families that move into the region every day. Right? The scarcity of other golf clubs in the area, the wonderful neighborhood that surrounds this golf course. But also what they bring to the table is a business model that they can leverage synergies that we can't. They have national contracts from a food supply standpoint. They have booze contracts that they can get pricing different from us. They have agronomy, right? Economy of scales that they bring savings. They also have a resource to run things in a way a little different than what ours are. So we modeled that to come up with a cash flow model on what the club may be valued for them. And before we went to any discussions, we had that in our back pocket to make sure that anytime we finally break the ice and talk about value, we had that in our pocket to ensure we were positioned getting the most we should, getting what we feel the value for them is and not this value for us.
So before I get to sort of the detail of sort of where we are, the deal, et cetera, the discussions, kind of who they are. They were founded back in 2011, so about 14 years ago, by who was the CEO of Arnold Palmer Golf, which was a golf management company with about 30 clubs. That individual saw an opportunity for clubs facing recapitalization decisions, potentially a sort of assessment approach, and potentially a need for another solution. They've grown from 0 in 2011 to 39 clubs that they now own and operate. Describe themselves as a boutique owner-operator of premier private clubs only in major metro areas such as ours, and focus on large-scale clubs, and are very deep pockets, capital reserves for investment, well-capitalized, etc. Their leadership team, the person I reference is on the left, Peter Nanula, who co-founded it with Susan Donovan. Our main work has been through their head of development, Christian Dunn. Here's the 39 clubs. You won't be able to read it. It will be in the presentation. You'll be able to access online. But basically, 39 clubs throughout the country. We focused on really 4 local clubs similar to us from a initiation fee dues perspective to do our due diligence. Their Charlotte club is Longview. That's currently a $100,000 initiation fee club. So we focus more on clubs that initiation fee range from like 10 to 20,000, dues sort of in our ballpark, 4-hour investigations, due diligence, interviews, all those things, and we'll talk more about that. This is straight out of their initial presentation to us about what they feel makes them different versus other providers. I'm just going to hit 2 of these. The one in bold that they have stressed and tried to demonstrate to us is they preserve your club's identity and culture. We'll talk about some examples we've seen around that, as opposed to sort of a cookie cutter approach of coming in and saying, okay, here's how we operate all of our clubs. Here's what will be changed. The other one I'll mention is the continuous capital improvements. They set aside out of each club's revenue a certain percentage for future down the road capital improvements. We've gotten to the point through the due diligence that we're at least at the point where we believe it's a viable option to discuss with members. We felt it was inappropriate to come in and say, guys, your choices are, again, are to write the big check or potentially a medium check if we can't get approval from you to do the big check. We thought you needed to know there's another alternative. I'm going to go through a lot of the benefits and a lot of the risks associated with it, but we've gotten to the point where we felt membership needed to evaluate this also. The clubs that we visited, you might be familiar with some of them. In Raleigh, 2 clubs, McGregor Downs and 12 Oaks. In Georgia, in Augusta, Westlake, and in Athens area, the Georgia Club. The club at Longview here in Charlotte. And a late addition to the list, only because Sophie happened to be in Texas for 2 weeks and her family had belonged to Walden Golf Club. We recruited her, and she did a great job spending a day there, talking to a lot of people, and gave us some great insights that we might get into in the Q&A. 5 of these are a super positive story that we got. One of them is quite contentious, and that one is Longview. We'll talk more about that, but that's where we've focused. Okay, so what exactly are we talking about doing, potentially, with them? Again, to be clear, we'd be selling all assets of River Hills Country Club. So land, golf course, clubhouse, racket facility, pool, everything. what would we get in return? First, they would pay off our debt of $2 million at closing. The reason that's important is from a long-term dues perspective, that frees up for them, over 300 and some thousand a year, which is our current debt service. Secondly, and more importantly, is the capital project commitment, the recapitalization. It says of $5 million. The reality is, this number started lower. Didn't think it was compelling enough to continue. Worked through, provided them the list for golf, the detailed Jeff Lawrence work, for rackets, the list you saw, and for house, what we're looking for. They basically come back and committed to do everything on the list within a 36-month time frame. Why that doesn't say 5.8 million, which is the number we said it would cost us, they anticipate it would cost them 15% less to do that because of their efficiencies. They have their own project management resources, et cetera, and they have 39 clubs where they constantly are doing these sorts of work. So commitment would be to do that. In addition, you'll see at the bottom, so that totals $7 million. In addition, they'd assume the liability of our equity members. So that's at least another $500,000 that eventually will need to be paid out to equity members. And then also that up to 5% a year of revenue going to future recapitalization. And we've seen great examples of that for the clubs that have been with them longer than the initial 3-4 years when they do the initial agreement, the subsequent sort of investments in the properties. I'm going to talk first benefits, and then I'm going to get to the significant risks of pursuing a path like this. Benefits are obvious and quite clear. The first, members have paid nothing for the completion of the projects that we just went through. What equated that if we were trying to do everything and got approval would be a $12,000 assessment for all full members. All those projects would be completed. Quite frankly, I've added, in addition to our list, because our belief is it would be difficult to get membership approval on a $12,000 assessment. So most likely, if you disagree with that, please raise your hand. So most likely, if we went that route, it would be a lower amount, which means, as Keith said, we'd be picking and choosing which projects we would get done. So not only is it no money out of the pocket, it's also the complete list. Their business model is based on a guarantee of no future assessment, so I certainly don't want to apply. We've negotiated that as a critical thing. That's their starting point of why they exist. So downstream, when you need the new roof, when the pool needs to be resurfaced, all those things, would be covered, would be done by them, not by us coming back, or whatever board coming back to us saying we need more cash. The control of future dues through operating efficiency, I'll talk a little more about that. And the bottom point's not insignificant. This is a group that runs 39 premier clubs. What we've seen, they run them very well. Amenities incredibly impressive. The sort of interactions with members, staff, etc., super positive. So this is a company that for a living runs premier country clubs and the operational excellence that goes with that. Okay, that's the good news. How about the risks? Let's, first one just jumps out at you, which is loss of control. Let's face it, there are new owners, we can advise, we can protect ourselves going in. They own the club. And so control is totally turned over. Obviously, we no longer have a governing board. and obviously a big risk. And I'm sorry, I should have said, these are, as we thought about generically dealing with any third party in this kind of arrangement, what would be the risk? So some of these are going to say, wait a minute, you said they don't do that. I'll get to that in a second. This would be generic risk of doing such a thing. Potential loss of identity, customs, culture, connection to our rich history. Dues increases. Oh my goodness, they're probably going to double our dues in 3 years. How do you? It doesn't take a member vote to say no. Now, if we want to increase dues more than 5%, we need 67% approval. Future capital assessments, transfer of ownership. They've been in business since 11. They've never sold a club, but who knows, in 10, 15 years, will the whole company be sold? Will they sell off some of the clubs? Big risk. Another thing that you immediately think of is, wow, they're probably really effective at growing. They're going to bring 100 more golfers in, and all of a sudden we're going to have trouble getting tee times on our course because we have so many golfers. That's a risk. We'll talk about how that can be mitigated. Loss of membership voice in the club performance, and then finally, large increase of non-member events. Clearly generating more revenue by having more non-member activity, which could negatively impact members. So let's talk about some of the risk mitigants. A starting point, quite honestly, with the whole, with the team, with Concert, was around, okay, we have these equity members, we have 29 lifetime members, we have 3 10-year members. Those need to be 100% contractually agreed upon, no changes. If that isn't going to happen, it's a non-starter because, well, certainly the equity members, way back in the day, and these lifetime members are people that stepped up, paid a lot of money in some cases to really keep the club going. So they understand that. That's a non-issue. Their policy's already around no membership assessment ever. That would be contractually obligated. Dues are interesting because they talked a lot about we're in the member experience business. Members aren't satisfied. It's our financials. We start losing members, we're in trouble. That all made sense. We're not in the dues increase business. I said, well, I'd love to see, or I need to see, for the clubs that you've had for, more than a few years, I want to see dues when you acquired them through today, and what's that increase. We focused on the clubs I mentioned, similar to us, those 4, and over the last 5 years, the compound annual growth rate in dues for those clubs was 1.5%. That's a bit of a misleading number because of an outlier. Westlake, they acquired them. They said, you guys are way overpriced. Until we put these amenities in through the recapitalization, we're going to lower dues $100 a month. After they put the recapitalization, they brought them back up to where they were. So if you back that group out, which is an unusual situation, they're not normally coming in lowering dues $100 a month. The other 3 clubs have averaged 3.5% compound annual growth rate. When you look at River Hills from 20 till now, I should remember that number, I don't, but it's, suffice to say, it's well above double 3.5%. And contractually, they'll agree to freeze dues for a period, still negotiating how long. And secondly, future increases will be tied to sort of an and/or agreed upon government CPI index and a composite index of clubs in our vicinity. So in other words, a CPI, if inflation comes down, CPI goes up 2.2%, and the clubs, in that competitive set, have increased 2%, then they would contractually agree not to increase more than 2.2%. All branding remains the same as the historical River Hills. We try to translate, okay, this potential customs, whatever, what are some of the customs we have that potentially they might look at and say, that's not our business practice. So, Frank provided to them, everything on the WGA, everything about the MGA, about the do's, the don'ts, the circle of friends, the 9-holders, the 18-holders, gave all the details around shotgun starts for those groups, etc. And I was very encouraged to hear that A, you're really not that different from most clubs that have similar things. B, the least thing we want to do is upset membership. So we see nothing in that set that we would not support. The toughest one is around the future transfer of ownership. And, where we're at right now is really a commitment around right of first discussion if they ever intended to do that. That's the one that I should have mentioned. To this point, we've taken it to the point where we wanted members to be aware and see if there's enough interest to take it down the road to the, hey, here's exactly what the agreement would be, here's the protection. We have not engaged legal because I didn't want to spend club money and members react, we're totally opposed to even pursuing this. If we continue down the path, need to get legal involved. And this is one area that we're going to want as much protection in as possible. On the issue of membership growth, I think without question, if we went this path, they are going to bring in more members than that we have currently. If we could add 30 or 40, let me get back to the cap. We have a bylaw cap of 900 members, 400 full, 250 sports, 250 social. Right now, rounding, we have, let's say, 350 full members. If there was a magic wand and somebody said, we have 30 more full members that are going to join tomorrow, we would sign up and take that in a second, right? We would get $600,000 in initiation fees. We would get $200,000 to $300,000 a year in additional revenue. Over the 5 years, that'd be $1 million to $1.5 million more dollars toward that capital. I think they will be successful. We're a nonprofit. We're limited on our ability to market and do things. My guess is they will be more successful in growing membership. So our issue would be, that's good, but there needs to be honoring of the caps, which they think our caps are very reasonable and would be put into the new bylaws. And secondly, the other question was, hey, do you have any wait lists in any of your clubs? If the answer would have been no, that would have been, to me, problematic, that means just keep bringing people on because initiation fees and dues. The reality is a third of their clubs right now have a wait list. So that was a somewhat comforting, in addition to honoring our current caps. And then on the non-member events, there is no question there would be certainly more Monday golf events. Our experience at their clubs ranges from maybe once or twice a month to 3 times a month kind of volume of Monday events. Don't know what, we've consciously tried to find profitable Monday events to bring into the club to increase non-member revenue, to put less pressure on member dues increases. They may be more successful in accomplishing that. They will agree to sort of constraints outside of Mondays around that. The concern that brings up, of course, right away is, well, if 2 or 3 times a month there's a Monday event, what does that do to the course? The shocking thing to us was learning how many of their courses are open 7 days a week. And even with that Monday volume, what our folks, board members, saw at those clubs was courses that were immaculate, despite open 7 days a week. The only thing that can translate, I asked Frank, well, how could that be? And it translates to more agronomy staff and better equipment. Is the only answer as to how you can do that. So let me recap, and then we're one more slide away from questions. Pros and cons of both options. Okay, so member assessment, the pros. If successful in getting that approved, it raises the capital we need for all the projects. Secondly, club maintains control of the club. And third, getting these projects done will be extremely beneficial to continued thriving of the club, or thriving more for the club through a golf course that's more spectacular, dining facilities better, a racket facility we can be proud of, etc. The cons. We think there's a low probability of getting sufficient membership approval of a assessment at that $12,000 level, which would translate then to, and then even if we did, we're estimating attrition of up to 10% at that level. The clubs we've looked at, there's been about 10 of them in our area that have done a recent assessment over the past 3 years. So a lot of clubs facing the same things we are. The low end of those were about a 4,000 assessment, the high end were 18,000. When you get to that upper end, above 10,000, one of them experienced 20% attrition. Wasn't that impactful for them because they had a waiting list? Would be extremely impactful to us because, as Keith pointed out, 10% attrition, just to stay even on dues, obviously, we would need to raise dues an equivalent amount. When we're already at 600 for full, raising dues to 660, throw on a greens fund of 40, all of a sudden we're a $700 to $750 club. That could begin a spiral of attrition because people say the dues are too high. So, that's a con. If we end up having to go with a lower assessment amount, the potential for future assessment, and obviously Keith talked at length about the project execution risk. The third party, pros, it's going to feel good out of the gate. Don't have to write a check and all the projects are getting done. That's great. Not going to have to write a future assessment check. And the club operated by an experienced hospitality firm with approximately 40 premier clubs. The cons, loss of control, limited ability to influence, limited protection against a change of ownership, and a significant increase in Monday events, non-member social events that either could be handled in a way that's not that impactful to members, or it could begin to get problematic. I referenced 5 of the clubs that very positive, Longview very negative. Most of the very negative is around non-member activity at a club that previously did not have much of that, and the fact that they've sold more to non-residents of the Longview community, and the issues around, not that there's been any security issues, but just the concern of more people entering through the security gates of a top 2 or 3 neighborhood in Charlotte with $5 million+ homes. So, next steps, and then we're going to open it up for questions, comments, etc. Obviously today, we'll have one more session. Thrilled with the turnout. We had a full room earlier, and we have a full one tonight in this session. Tomorrow we're going to meet with the employees, since obviously we're going to hear about sort of where we are on these options. Very importantly, next Tuesday, November 4th, concert will be here. We're structuring it the same way, 3 town halls throughout the day, 12 to 2, 3 to 5, 6 to 8. Tonight at after 8 o'clock tonight, there'll be a email coming out asking you to register for one of those events. I'd ask you to, potentially some of you are excited about the pros. Others of you hate the idea. What I'd ask is, if you can, come to the meeting next week. Hear from them, learn from them, ask questions. And they're going to stay on the 5th and 6th. And we're going to have 3. You don't need to register on the 5th and 6th. Just kind of stop by. It'll be more one-on-one kind of conversations from 12 to 2, 3 to 5, 6 to 8. Ultimately, we are still in the board is still in the membership feedback gathering mode. Okay, so there's not a proposal today. We've laid out really 2 approaches. We want to hear and get feedback over the next month around how people feel about both of those. We're going to send out some survey-like document so you have a mechanism to also get feedback back. The board, at some point, end of November into December, will need to decide what we believe the path that members are most likely to approve and want. The board then would need to vote on that and then submit for vote whatever that proposal would be. There would then be a 30-day time frame, et cetera. So this decision obviously will be made by members. The board is hopefully doing the due diligence, getting member feedback, putting forward what we think has the best, is the right path and has the best chance for approval. So I think with that, we can open it up for questions. John graciously agreed to be the Phil Donahue and run around with the microphone so everybody can hear. And I think got one way in the back.
Happy birthday, Dan. I guess one of the comments I would make, and I'm glad there are about 6 board members here, is that we're kind of in a situation of pay me now or pay me later. And what I mean by that, I did a little investigation on the group you're looking to sell the assets to, and it is private equity backed. So those investors are going to be asking for a 20, 30+% return per year. So what that means is they're not coming here to raise your dues by 5% a year. They're gonna, they're either going to fix this thing up and flip it to another party that can raise dues above CPI to get their return, or they're going to raise your dues to get their 20% return. But nobody in the private equity community is there to invest for 10%. They're looking for 20, 30, potentially even a double. So I just want to make sure that the board represents to all the members here adequately what is really going to happen and how you guys need to, and this kind of goes to you, Keith, you need to model how they get a 20% per year return, which is a double in 5 years. So if they buy it from you for 5, they want to sell it for 10 in 5 years, which is the private equity model. And so you know, I mean, I've worked with these guys I worked for First Union Wachovia Wells for 34 years, and I worked in private equity financing for 30 years. So that's the game they play.
Yeah. Thanks. Let me, I know Keith wants to respond. Let me just respond to a few things. One, I've asked, and they will talk about ownership levels. They do have private equity money. That's on a very limited basis. Secondly, you just asserted several things are going to happen. They've owned clubs now since 11. They've never sold one, so they haven't flipped and got a return. Secondly, the dues history we've seen does not support what you just said. Third, and very great question, because we had trouble getting our hands around this. they're not doing this for charity, right? They're gonna have to hit return hurdles. So we started, like, okay, let me get this right. They're talking about $7.5 million. This really isn't a fair comparison, but if we were a for-profit business right now, on a good year, we'd probably make 300 grand, right? So, you know, the return of making 300,000 a year with a $7.5 million up front, Troy isn't gonna cut it. We can quickly get our head around, okay, they're paying off the debt immediately. Our debt service is about 300 and some thousand, so let's round that to 3. So as soon as that's paid off, if somebody here is kind enough to write a $2 million check to pay our debt off, we'd be getting 300,000 more a year to be able to send to these projects. So 3 gets to 6. You add in the purchasing power, Keith calculated based on you know, our food, our chemicals, our fertilizer, etc. That's easily another 300,000 to 400,000. You throw in member growth, where I think they'll be able to get us closer to our caps. All of a sudden, that's 300,000 or 400,000 more in profitability. And then finally, the non-member events, you know, let's call that 100,000. It's easy to see without doing anything dramatically different, except hitting closer to our caps and having non-member events, taking advantage of purchasing efficiency and debt reduction, where this is, you know, easily $1.5 million profit for them, which would enable them, you know, excellent point around, they need to be making a return on that. So, big question that, you know, I've asked them to address on the 4th is, I know you're privately held, et cetera, but we need an understanding of the influence, the amount of ownership from a private equity perspective. But that gave us the comfort of, okay, this sounds too good to be true. They're going to do something totally different to hit the hurdles that they need. But when you run through that, you can see where, you know, it's achievable.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add other than, you know, there are no guarantees, right? But they have shown us through past practice that their history is not one where they go in, invest, and flip, right?
Okay, that's fair, and I appreciate the build up to the 1.5, because, you know, 20% of $7 million is about, you got to make 1.5 million a year.
Right.
But and that's very helpful, and I appreciate that. I will ask the Longview Club or whatever, what did their dues go up? One might estimate, I mean, like, we're probably well below market across every single class of membership here, relative to relative to others in the Charlotte area.
No, they've come in and assessed that we are actually just approaching being ahead of where we should be based on the amenities offered. And we've looked to our dues versus those other concert clubs that we visited, and our dues are right in the same area.
Okay.
But to answer, so there are no guarantees. I think you bring up fair issues. The best we can do is contractually try and put up guardrails to protect ourselves. We haven't invested in that yet. We want to understand, is this viable, right? We do think that doing nothing for the long-term viability of the club that affects the neighborhood isn't a good option. So we're trying to weigh that and be mindful of all those issues. But again, our diligence to this point indicates they're not in the business of flipping. They don't have a history of increasing dues, no assessments. They don't sell to develop land, and we're going to work to ensure we have provisions that safeguard us the best we can.
Okay, great.
First thing, Dan and Keith, I want to say, I applaud the humility that the board has had to even bring this to us, because there's a lot of boards out there that have a hubris that would not allow them. There's nobody that can run this club better than this group of people here. So for you guys to even bring this option to us, I applaud you, number one. Number two, Keith, I thought your numbers at 10x, having been a person that just sold a business several years ago, 10x was a very generous number on the selling side. So, in other words, you over pushed what the value, in my opinion, of this club is. And the other question I have, Dan, is if I were to just look at some of the clubs that you talked about, it seems to me that most of the clubs they currently own might be a step or two ahead of us when it comes to overall look, overall facility, age of facility, et cetera, et cetera. My curiosity, quite honestly, is somewhat of what you addressed a minute ago, that does this look too good to be true? I mean, you know, an ex-dealership owner, somebody comes to me with $50 million and says he wants to buy it, you know, I'm writing the check that moment. So,
Well, I think, thanks, we got our head around the too good to be true issue when we did that modeling up to, okay, understand where they're coming from. If we couldn't do that, if we could only get to 500,000 or 600,000, it'd be, okay, something big is gonna happen here, because why else would they be doing that? On the clubs, I'm sorry, the first part was about clubs that,
seem to be a higher level.
yes, I'm sorry, thank you. I characterize half of their clubs as being more Longview-like, okay? Meaning, Longview now is $100,000 initiation fee, okay? Expectations, comparisons to us probably aren't that relevant. That's why we focused on, those other clubs. Earlier, they got to number 39 during this process, is a Cape Cod, you can look at unbelievable Cape Cod facility that just joined the concert group. So I'd say, at least half would not be that comparable to us. There's another half that are right in our range. Now, Frank, would you mind talking to kind of what you saw at Raleigh with a sort of lower initiation fee, lower due?
Sure. So hopefully you can hear me. I had the opportunity, along with John, to go to the Raleigh clubs, both McGregor Downs and 12 Oaks. One of the first people we talked to were the people that were taking our bags, servicing us, trying to get us, just organized. And I asked them right up, how busy are you here? Said, without a doubt, this club is opened up 7 days a week. So mind you, we hadn't seen the golf course yet at this stage. So I'm thinking to myself, what could this course really look like? Then we talked about Monday events. This is a club that has a very, I don't know if anybody's been to McGregor Downs, but it has a very large footprint. Their smallest banquet room is bigger than this. Okay, they have like 3 of them, plus some outdoor dining as well. So they have the capacity to do many different events without upsetting the membership per se. So long and short, we have lunch, great service. I mean, they knew we were coming. God forbid if it wasn't, right? So, what's the golf course? All I can tell you is it mimicked River Hills, except where there were no out of bounds. It was not, the course was designed for to have no out of bounds. The greens ran at about 14, with 13 and 14. We couldn't believe it. We really didn't believe them until we got out there, dropped our ball on the ground on the green just to see, just to practice putting. The ball never stopped moving. When we got out of the course was impeccable. The greens were cut, manicured beautifully. The fairways, cart paths. It just was a lot too good to be true. We had lunch and interviewed with the GM, spoke to a couple of members as well as the head pro there. We took that same, went to 12 Oaks the next day. Much newer club, newer development, more of like an HOA facility. Jack Nicklaus course was a big course for me. I didn't appreciate it as much as what McGowan did. It was driving greens again, so, but at the end of the day, this course could have held an event, PGA event, any day of the week. This course was immaculate. Big greens, big footprint, again, much newer facility, you know, everything the same. And when I asked him at the end of the day, we were just leaving, I had no expectation, but I would have thought that this would have been at least a $30,000 or $40,000 initiation fee. And they said they had just raised the initiation fee to $20,000. I'm sitting around, I'm standing there looking around, looking at this facility, this club, and I'm saying to myself, this is $20,000 compared to less than $20,000. There's a big noticeable difference. The staff, I think, John, you were there. We talked to not only the head pro, but the director of golf, person who was over the instruction for golf. And these gentlemen have been there prior to them taking over 12 Oaks. And again, there was nothing that said concept.
It's a different demographic.
Yeah.
Where that club is and where that development is.
Yeah,
It's a very much a different demographic.
right.
Younger,
Yes, I would say so, very much so. Where McGregor Downs was much more like us. Because that club is, I think, 50-some odd years old, if I remember correctly.
How long
It
have
reminded
these,
me more of us.
how long have these two clubs in Raleigh been owned by the concert group?
McGregor was 10 years?
2015.
Yeah, 2015, so 10
And
years.
12 Oaks was only 4 years, maybe?
4 years. And
5.
I think 12 Oaks was established in maybe 2013. It was a relatively new club.
Yeah. The McGregor we found very relatable because of the age of the club. I was able to spend time with who was the president when they did the deal back in 15. The three biggest things that stuck with me from he's still a member, been there for 20 years, 10 before, 10 after. Big thing that stuck with me from him was, number one, he said, I said, how did you decide this? How did members decide to go this way? He said, the board was proposing a $15,000 assessment back in 2015. That would equate to 20-some thousand now. And for leverage, the board contacted this group and brought in and said, if you don't approve this assessment, we're gonna have to go this direction. Members listened, members said, we wanna go this direction. And it ended up being a 92-8 vote there. Second thing that stuck with me was, I said, they say they're not gonna change stuff, customs, traditions, is that true? And he said, I've been here 20 years, this place, in my mind, is no different than it was before. Same traditions, just more amenities. And then finally, on the advisory board, because again, with I think I forgot to mention that, the feedback loop is, we no longer have a board, there's an advisory board. And I said, is that something that is listened to, has influence, et cetera? He said, I've been on it since the beginning for the 10 years. And I wouldn't be on it if that wasn't the case. So, it was.
And I just want to, with valuation, so you understand the process. When it was hard to really, it was a little ambiguous. What's being transferred, right? And when you go through it and you think about the consideration, it's the $5 million worth of capital, $2 million worth of debt. Dan and I differ a little bit on our opinion on how to account for this, but they're also assuming the liability associated with 10-year and lifetime members. It's $2 million of future dues that they are assuming a club that won't have that pay stream. So to me, that's part of the consideration. We're over $9 million. We've developed a model, in their perspective, that was less than that. You saw the 4.7 from our perspective, what the value is to us. Another way is to do comps. Okay, do a search when you go home on golf courses that have been sold in this region. There are some outliers. The vast majority are 2 to 4 million. Why price so low? Again, it gets back to the special purpose properties. it gets back to the cash flow they can generate. A lot of these clubs that are up for sale, there's a reason they're up for sale. They weren't able to recapitalize. They're not in the financial position we're in that drives our value. Okay, so it's hard to get your head around that, but it's really, and we went in, our first discussion with them, again, we haven't spent money on legal funds because we don't want to overcommit the expense. But we stopped the discussion. We said, okay, we're not impressed. And so I think it put us in a pretty decent power of negotiation, knowing that they were dealing with someone that had an understanding for how to address valuation. So just something to add. And again, we want to get in front of you because the knee-jerk reaction when this is proposed, you're going to say, no way, right? Lose control. We wanted to get in front of you so you could be more mindful as you go through the thought process.
Thank you. So, first of all, thank you to the board. I don't know if you realized you were going to have to do all this work when you signed up to be.
No way.
But I'm just blown away by the amount of time, dedication that you guys have, ladies and gentlemen, have put into this. So thank you. I'm all for the full assessment or sale, just personally, because we have to move forward. We can't just, we don't do anything, we're going to go backwards. And if we do the halfway, that sounds like a big disaster. Anyway, that's my opinion. But my question is, if we do go with the sale option, this group sounds amazing and maybe too good to be true. Maybe they're going to give us more money than we deserve. That would be great. But have we thought about an RFP? Are there other groups out there? Could there be a better deal out there, a better group? Just curious.
Yeah, very fair question. The short answer is we have not talked to anyone else, to be perfectly honest. How we arrived at that was, again, this started, quite honestly, not us consciously saying, hey, we want to put the club up for sale. It was them reaching out to us saying, we'd love to talk, right? And then it was, well, you know, we think members, hey, we don't feel good about this, but we need to talk. Then the boxes started getting checked. And then it was, okay, well, that's not enough. You need to commit to this. And then, you know, all the way through. The most likely other candidates, to be perfectly frank, one is people would know it as the old Club Corp more often than their new name, which is Invite. And they both, unlike Concert, they both manage and operate clubs. Club retains ownership. They manage and operate for annual management fee. And they also go this route through the recapitalization. Either correctly or incorrectly, among the board, they are so big, there was enough experience with friends that belong to clubs that they have. And it's not being critical about what they're doing, but it was clear it was much more of a, here's the approach we take. My words, cookie cutter around, the belief was it would feel quite different to be, it would be clear you're a Club Corp, Invite Club, than, hey, what was described certainly from McGregor Downs, which is, we're McGregor Downs, we happen to be, owned by Concert. The other group that would come up is the McConnell Group. That's a group predominantly North Carolina's based. I think they have a Tennessee and a Virginia. It's grown to 17 clubs. If you remember the sort of the principle around large number of clubs, one could argue 17 is approaching that. Belief was a much higher probability of potential acquisition or sellout by the owner, et cetera. To be, they've been very candid, they being Concert, candid with us. When I pressed the question of, have you ever sold one of your private clubs? The answer is no. Have you ever tried to sell one of your private clubs and failed? At first, the answer was no. Keith and I were on the phone with them. They said, well, Dan, to be totally transparent, And he said, this is public information you can find. Back in, to be honest, I forget, it was 17 or 18, somewhere in that time frame. I think they were only about 15 strong, not 39 clubs. They were approached to be bought by Club Corp, at the time, Club Corp. Evidently that progressed fairly far. You know, I read an article that sounded like Club Corp backed away. If you talk to Concert, they backed away. But, you know, and the message just was, we're now of a, you know, sort of a size, the financial wherewithal required to sort of do that would be very limited. So, those, and I mean, to be perfectly fair, sort of capacity to date, it's consumed a lot of hours, specifically with Concert. Now,
That makes a lot of sense.
if we decided to say, you know what, stop, we want to get other bids, I honestly don't know what the reaction would be. They've invested enough in these 4 months where they can say, we feel you're not acting in good faith, we're pulling the deal. That exact question came up at 12 o'clock, and Joe Irving made a great point, which was, they're probably, they're only going to acquire one. They want to get a property in this area. They're going to get one, okay? I don't know if they have a number 2. They are extremely interested in us for a lot of reasons around the growth, around the beauty of the course, around the overall, around the community we're in, that we're in a good financial position, etc. So there was.
Yeah. One question, comment. No, I don't need that effort. When are you going to set a timeline to get the vote and determine the assessment, yay or nay? Because she's right. Got to poop or get off the pot. We got to do something.
Plus, you've got to change your boards.
And plus, you got the board change. You guys are fantastic. You're right. The next board may not be year after year after. And I've seen some of these clubs Concert, and they do a fantastic job.
Yeah, thanks.
And Dan, I want to just add too, that kind of exclusivity versus RFP. If done correctly, offering somebody in this day and age exclusivity can be an unbelievable negotiation leverage on your part. Because, you know what? This needs to be done, or else I guess we'll just put an RFP out. This needs to be done, or I guess we'll just put an RFP out. I can tell you, I've seen it time and time again, where exclusivity creates people overpaying for what actually would have happened in an RFP. So don't think of that as a negative. In my opinion, that's a positive when done properly.
Okay. Thanks. Good point. On your question, as far as the timeline, if early versions of this, because we spoke to committees and other people prior to this, made a lot of changes or whatever, you would have seen a date that said, by November 19th, the board is going to make a proposal, it'll go out for vote, etc. I think the correct two things happened. One was feedback around, wow, why are you rushing this so fast, a decision like this? You need to make sure you're getting enough input, etc. But secondly, quite frankly, is capacity of the remaining work. We can't go, if we're proceeding with this path, we can't go to membership before we have all the agreement worked out. So I can stand here and say, they told me they're not going to raise dues above this. Well, until that's in a PSA that, we have not engaged, as we said, attorneys to this point because we needed to be sure this was worth continuing to pursue from a membership perspective. If it was, we need to quickly get who we've preliminarily discussed, identified is the attorney that was used a few years ago on the Georgia Club in Athens that was acquired by Concert. Familiarity with the process, familiarity with all that. we think it could reduce our hours. So in the perfect world, my hope would be prior to the end of this year, this board will vote on one of the two options. Let's say we've heard enough, negotiated enough, feel comfortable that we want to go concert. We will vote as a board. The proposal then would go out. 30 days is required because, you know, it clearly is a bylaw change. And then, you know, the results would come in. So the objective would be for this board to do that now. With that being said, I honestly have no idea how long it will take to get to, we have in our hands I got yesterday, the first draft of their PSA incorporating everything we asked for. I now need to turn that over to an attorney with, hey, here's a list of stuff we're really worried about that we need to be protected. You know, let's change the language to make sure that it's maximizing our protection. That may take 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 1 week, I honestly don't know. But the objective would be for this board to do that.
One more question. You know, we have social, racket, and full members. With new ownership, if it went that way, is it only golf members that can golf, or how does
Great,
that work?
great question.
Good question.
One of the deal breaker elements
Is that they
was
changed that class.
was you cannot change the privileges, in particular around golf, from our other categories. So in other words, sports members get 72 hours, 72 holes. Sometimes 72 holes. You cannot come in here and in a year say, hey, sports members no longer have golf privileges. So that is an element of that list I talked about. Social has 36 holes. That's a critical deal breaker element that can't be changed. Now, if they want to go forward and their sports memberships going forward that they sell to new members does not include that, you know, we can't control that. What we can protect is grandfathering our full members who might want to downgrade to sports at a certain age. So to me, that falls into that deal breaker element. Conceptually, they've agreed with that. That's where it's like, okay, is this protect us enough where Monte is.
I'm good. The overall capital improvements, does that include the greens and the grounds? I know there was two separate lists of what was going to happen.
Yeah, so the $5 million reconciles back to $5.8 million, our cost. The 5.8, our cost, had management fees, contingencies, loss of revenue. The $5 million of concert, they don't consider any of those, right? So it's the same tax.
So not including.
But the green.
No, so that's included. And the greens, contractually, where in the negotiations to date, they've stated in terms that they will rebuild the greens at USGA spec if they fail.
So they got Jeff Lawrence's list and said,
In the future.
okay, we'll do, within 3 years we will do the greens. We will do, they ran down the list. We basically went back and said, what we're hearing from membership
No greens, right?
is if you're basically saying in 2027 you're going to shut the course down for a year to replace the greens, that's probably going to be a no vote from a whole lot of members who are saying, we just did this not that long ago. So so the commitment I've asked for is when greens need to be replaced, that they will be done, not respread, they will be done to USGA specs. That would be in the contract there, and I apologize if I don't think we talked about their parking. That was the prior meeting.
Yeah, we didn't bring that up.
So, when they were here, and granted they were just here for a day, they had their agronomy experts in, right? And they were thinking they were about to see greens that were
terrible. Based on what-
And because of Jeff saying, I recommend immediate replacement of them. Comment number one was, wow, these, we'll a lot better than we thought. Two, as they examined whatever, they said, wow, first of all, your agronomy team has done an incredible job throughout the whole course, compliments, et cetera. But we have ways of practices that we've learned across our clubs that will get these babies perking better, and we think you have more life than maybe you think. And we said, great, but you know, sooner or later, and when they do, we don't want a Band-Aid, we need a commitment, USGA specs. That has been agreed upon, that's in the term sheet itself.
Yeah, good.
I was, I guess that answers a lot of questions about the golf course and, you know, their commitments there. The pictures that you got set out, they look really cool. Are they, these are all representation of what you put up there as far as the $5 million?
No.
Okay.
So that's, and then I'm glad, can I, so those were depictions, when I was going through and I quoted the $175,000 option, that was just to remove this. Those other depictions of what could be, and we did get quotes for $1 million. As we were prioritizing, felt that $1 million will not be supported. That'll bring the price tag, you know, to $6.5 million. And then if you did the outside dining option, the nicest one, we're over $7 million. And we thought we were getting in an area that just, we couldn't gather support. That's possibilities. So as we've gone through preliminary negotiations on defining term sheets, the most ambiguous part of this so far has been the clubhouse. Rackets, we had all the defined actions with 2 quotes, easy for them to reference. Golf course, we had the master plan with estimated costs, easy for them to execute. This space was ambiguous, right? They didn't have enough time to assess, have engineers come in and give us a true commitment on achieving those visions, what it would cost. What they did, their reaction was, boy, this place has so much potential. Right now, we're gonna have a $2 million allocation to drive improvements at your club. They had comments, man, that view out the back, you wanna put all-weather dining there? Oof, this is an underutilized space. They had comments about, they visited the pool and the possibility there with improving the cabana, outside televisions, but there hasn't been enough time to define that and have depictions of what that would be. Right now, we've landed $2 million allocated to clubhouse improvements.
That at a minimum would include the kitchen work that needs to be done, expanded banquet, and all-weather dining to be defined where.
And David, what we've seen is that at other clubs, they've actually spent more than what they went in and promised that they were willing to spend. They're very focused on family activities, increasing family rooms, etc. So, I mean, at the Georgia Club, they went in and did more than they even anticipated doing.
Yeah, and the important thing is initially we were very focused on is the number 4 million, is it 5 million, what is that number? It became obvious that that's important, but what's more important is the project commitment, because the reality is we're saying, okay, bunkers are $1 million. They may be able to do that in all probability for 700,000 or 800,000. That, to the specs that we've given, you need to do it exactly like this, that Jeff put together. So it became apparent, well, it's less of a, why do we care if it costs them 7 if they're delivering the same thing? What matters is the project commitment. So a great question came up earlier in the last session around what happens if there's overruns, okay? Great example that, Sophie learned in Walden. Did I mention Sophie in Walden earlier?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry, things are running together.
They're blending the meeting.
The irrigation.
Irrigation, what do you want to?
Just the irrigation for their golf course. Concert, when they first bought Walden, had committed to a $1 million improvement of the irrigation system for their golf course, and when they evaluated it and inspected it, it needed full replacement, and they finished that the first year, and they put in 2.1 million for that. And then they completely renovated their cafe restaurant, which I had lunch at, and it's just fabulous. Walden is a golf club, it's nothing else. So it's just a golf club, and it's a little cafe restaurant, and they have just been thrilled with the relationship.
So, on that note, first of all, if they take over, do they supply the staff that work here?
Great question.
Good question.
How, first of all, their state policy is they want 100% retention of the staff. How it works, there's not sort of a interviewing process, we're gonna keep them, not keep them. 100% of the employees in the day of closing at midnight are terminated from River Hills, and at 12:01, they are hired by the new entity, River Hills /Concert. So, they have stressed the importance to them, and quite frankly, members like seeing familiar faces at the bar or, various areas of the club. Their intent and indeed process is to retain them all. They are employees, the GM is hired, put in by Concert. That's who runs the club. And the staff reports to that individual. And it would be sort of the whole staff retained over. Now, what happens, after the GM is in for a year and, may decide to upgrade a position or whatever, that would be up to them. But it's 100%.
What I'd add to that though, so they also, it's 39 clubs. From an HR perspective, they have the ability to have a bench, right? They have the ability to go to other clubs when there are opportunities. And it also, what it represents for our club and our employees here is that there could be opportunities for them outside of this club, giving them flexibility to relocate possibly, develop into different roles. There's just more opportunities in that structure. That one of their comments too, early on when we spoke to them was, what was the term they used, the HR, the focus on smiles, we hire smiles. And it was very meaningful, I thought, when we went through and the exposure we have to their employee base.
Yeah, so you've talked about.
I'm just worried that you actually need more staff. And as it expands, the kitchen, this, that, all this stuff, and it's very hard to find people to work these days. So you have to find good people to keep up with all of this and make this club, right?
Yeah.
So
Certainly need to retain, the least thing they want is a bunch of turnover that they need to then hire. Yes.
Yeah, you're doing a great job, by the way. My question is, in order to do all these improvements to the golf course, have you had discussions about bringing in additional agronomy staff, improving our agronomy facility, which really needs a lot of work, and also what equipment, or have you discussed about possibly purchasing that's going to improve everything?
Yeah, good question. If you go back to, let me get my years right, late 23, and I had the pleasure of convincing members to vote for a pretty significant dues increase because it was over 5%. And the rationale as to why we were doing that, we benchmarked ourselves across key clubs around various areas and found that we were significantly lower on payroll for agronomy. And we knew we had agronomy equipment we didn't have, that we needed that we didn't have. Excuse me. So we, thankfully, members approved the dues increase. We significantly increased the agronomy budget. We bought, we didn't have legit fairway mowers. We took a year to get them, we got them. We've started on that journey. To do that again, quite honestly, to increase, that would require sort of another dues increase above that level. I can't speak to at all specifically around their staffing models around that. All we can speak to are the results. And the only way we can get our head around the results of what the courses look like is they must have the right equipment and they have enough staff, because, you know, when Frank came back and said they're open 7 days a week and they do events quite frequently on Mondays, and, you know, my assumption, you know, that's gonna beat the heck out of the course. And it's like, you know, the course was spectacular.
And also asked them, excuse me, I also asked them about how soon do they start, because we can't start that early in the morning, right? And I asked them, you know, well, how soon do mowers start getting out? He said, I don't know, somewhere around 6:30, 7 o'clock. And I was expecting to hear 5 o'clock or 5:30, you know. So it could only be because they have such a much larger footprint than what we have. They have to have more equipment, most likely better equipment, and more staff to maintain that golf course. So that goes for both.
So just a great job, and the amount of work behind the scenes and the courage to sort of go down that path is remarkable. And you've said this, but I think we're somewhat understating. I mean, one, I agree with the comment earlier. It's either do the whole thing or sell it out. Don't half-ass it again. Don't kick the can down again down the road. But if we go after this ourselves, the risk we take, now you called it executional risk, but what are the odds that we're gonna do these projects within 10% of budget on schedule?
Right.
I mean, we haven't done a project on schedule, on plan, right? I mean, so it's just not, we're volunteers and we have staff trying, but we're not professionals like these guys are. And we don't have a bench. You know, if Aaron were to leave, I mean, we don't have a second. I mean, well, what if Chef leaves? We don't have a second. I mean, so we've got a lot of risk here if we continue to try and do this ourselves. Just
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you.
Dan, how about the reciprocal policy with concert?
Thank you. They have a reciprocal policy they call Symphony Select, which is access to their other, to all clubs that they own outside of a 100-mile radius of your home club. So for us, that would be 37 other clubs, not Long Beach. That's a sign-up member choice. It's a $50 a month charge. What you get for that are 6 rounds at any of those courses. And to be honest, I don't know what you pay at those courses. I presume it's a reduced fee, but access to those courses. And you also get 4, in case you don't use the 6, you get 4 guest fees at your club. So you can bring 4 guests in and they don't have to pay the fee to help offset the $50 a month charge. They have other sort of 4-fee international programs, et cetera, that, to be honest, you know, they'll explain next week. But from the control of that, from our perspective, is their limit is 1% of the club's rounds will be used for reciprocal play. So in our case, I'm going to round to a number. Suppose it was 200 rounds. 1% of 20,000 is 200.
They were like 20.
Yeah, so fine, 200. They start tracking beginning of the year how many Symphony Selects in January, February, March, April. As soon as it hits 200, the program shut down for that course till next year. The reality is, in my mind, we're probably going to have more demand from our members to play several of their courses, given the locations, the sort of quality of the courses. I'm sure there are situations for somebody whose family in River Hills or close by that's a member elsewhere. I don't think people are going to be traveling here for the reciprocal privileges of playing here, but it is limited to that 1% of rounds.
And do they create reciprocal agreements with the local clubs for
That,
situations
We're investigating.
Yeah, what we said was,
Omega.
we would like we would need a reciprocal arrangement with local clubs. Does that violate the philosophy you have? They said no. That varies by club. driven a lot by the GM and the Club Pro. And I said, that's very important, you know, for, you know, when the greens work is closed, right? We're gonna need a robust reciprocal program. So certainly not defined at this point, but I just wanna make sure there wasn't no, we don't believe in local reciprocals or whatever. I know we're just, is it 5 or?
Yeah, 5.
Dan, real quick
Okay.
question. You alluded to some issues at Longview, I think. What, you didn't really talk about it.
Yes.
I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's easy to find on social media because I've had 15 different members send me the Reddit post on the Longview lawsuit. What I've asked them to do is explain, I've talked in detail about all the points that were made. I've asked them in their presentation on the 4th I did go through that slide, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
On the 4th, to explicitly talk about that. My kind of summary around it from my perspective and what I've learned is it's, you know, HOA driven. I don't know what the agreement was, that was sold by Mel Graham of the Billy Graham nephew, I think. He's the developer of Longview. He owned it. He sold it. My understanding is there was an interest within the community to purchase it among several individuals. He went a different direction. Concert has come in, has added non-member, non-Longview resident events. That has been at the chagrin of the Longview community. There hasn't been like a security issue or something that arose from that, but the lawsuit is really hovered around that. The other thing you may read is they've created new categories to get around the cap. In other words, they agreed to a cap, and now they're selling a different category that doesn't count, and it's providing access to golf. Asked explicitly, what is that? What I was told, and again, this is all from the concert perspective, what I was told was, first of all, there were no caps. Longview didn't have tee times, which a lot of you may know clubs like I can't get my head around that. You just show up in the morning and everybody decides who's going to go. And it speaks a little bit to the exclusivity and lower volume kind of activity. They did indeed add a new membership category to try to get play in the afternoons. So it was a limited golf weekday afternoon. You're a full member otherwise, we can only play golf weekday afternoon. Quite frankly, we had talked about that as brainstorming years ago around, hey, is that a good idea here to generate more revenue, whatever. So they did that. They added 29 non-residents who signed up for that, which I think threw fuel on the fire around more non-residents coming through the pearly gates of Longview. And they stopped it. There was enough of an uproar, they stopped offering it. So most of the comments are on that. I read in that Reddit, I read comments about course condition, not up to par. We shrugged because we were there. They played, the report from the people that golfed were like, oh my God, this place is spectacular. Now, the reality maybe it was more spectacular earlier, but certainly compared to any standard I think that we would hold to, it's sort of spectacular. So that's but I've asked them, that is, very contentious. You'll see, Google lawsuits, concert golf. There's a list of 5 or 6 or 7. There, wow, is that a lot? I Googled McConnell Group lawsuits, and then I Googled invite lawsuits, and each of them have a long list. Many of the others on concert were a terrible tragedy that a tree fell and killed an employee in one of their clubs. There was a wrongful death suit filed. There was a club they took over that the prior practice around how tips were handled was being fought in court. I mean, you can find all those. On the invite front, they had a $200 million, I think it was $200 million, settlement around what they called member refunds. Basically, it was equity payments and how that was handled. That's why we're explicitly getting the agreement that they need to be. So they will address that more. Please, we've had 4 months to kind of go through this, all the due diligence, et cetera. Reactions that we get immediately, some are like, wow, I don't have to write a check, I love it. Well, there's a lot more to it. Other is totally opposed, don't even want to hear about it. What I ask is, please try to come to hear from them, hear the story, ask questions. They'll be here the next 2 days also, plenty of time to go through everything. And to think through it.
Just to clarify, it's November 4th and then the 2 days following November 4th will be.
Is November 4th, you're gonna receive a link right after the
Tonight,
meeting,
yeah.
and you're gonna be able to register for one of those 3 sessions on Monday.
Can we get copies of your slides?
They will be out.
They'll email out the presentation.
Yeah, they'll be out. And after the concert, there will be a distribution of a bunch of frequently asked questions, other information. We're waiting till they're here to send all that. Thanks everybody for your attention.